Episode 115. Sir John Templeton's growth fund generated 15% annual returns on average from 1954 through 1992, and 1915 was the first year that Albert Einstein presented the theory of general relativity. Beyond MD, episode 115, here we go! April is usually my least productive time of year, given the NHL playoffs are on. However, many of you may know that the Penguins are struggling mightily, on the brink of elimination and staring into a self-inflicted abyss, which gives me a little bit more time for the podcast, which is alive and well. You all know that I enjoy relevant and under-discussed topics, which is why today I'm excited to present an episode on SR&ED credits, also known as SR&ED credits, which stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development Credits, and this is a tax incentive program issued by the CRA. I host Dr. Nikhil Patil, who is CEO and founder of Innovatus Consulting, and he and his team are dedicated to providing expert technical advice for efficiency and innovation for individuals and businesses, and that includes the process of applying for and claiming SR&ED credits. So if you are doing exciting, groundbreaking research or innovation behind the scenes, then this episode is for you. And if you know anybody in your network who could benefit from this, I would be grateful if you could spread the word by sharing this episode. Without further delay, let's get on to the interview. All right, Nikhil, I want to welcome you first to the podcast. I think the topic at hand today is going to be quite relevant. We're going to be talking about SR&ED credits. And the reason I say this is I know many of my colleagues who are doing new and innovative things. Some of them are creating EMRs, some of them are creating AI scribes for family physicians, and even AI-assisted products for specialists. So I think it's going to be very relevant. But before we jump into SR&ED credits, Nikhil, why don't you give us a little bit on your background and journey and what you do today?
Sure. So thank you, Yatin, for having me and for this opportunity and the wonderful work you're doing to educate physicians in this space with this podcast. So I'm a follower of your podcast as well as the newsletter. So a little bit about my backstory. So I started my journey. I'm a physician, but I don't practice as a physician currently. I'm currently working more in the research domain in big pharma. But prior to that, I completed my MD and then I did my postgraduate diploma from Oxford. And then I ventured into the academic research world, working in the hospital setting as a research coordinator, and then transitioned up as a research project manager, and then moved up into the pharma space. So the reason I got into working and developing my organization, Innovatus Consulting, it started in 2019, just a year prior to the pandemic. So it's been 7 years now. Because there were four main gaps that I identified, I think that the market was not serving. So the first one was the retroactive scramble versus a proactive approach. So a lot of times these small, medium-sized companies are working towards the end of the fiscal years and getting all the timesheets, emails, and their documents ready to submit to their accountants and their SR&ED consultants to get this filed and approved. So what we do is we work with our clients throughout the fiscal year to get all these done, before the tax deadline, number one. So whether it's things like the design history files, the clinical protocols, the workflows, the meeting minutes, all these, as if the company was being audited tomorrow. So what that does is you're optimizing the data, you're ready from day one, and you're not left scrambling at the end. So that was one thing. The second thing is the life science translation gap. So most of the SR&ED firms are general accountants or software-focused tech writers. They don't have the technical know-how or the nuances to write the technical narratives that the CRA is looking for these claims. So I believe with my background and our team's background, being an MD and a decade of experience running, research trials, we have the technical bandwidth knowledge to kind of work with these healthcare companies, life science companies, startups, as well as medical professional corporations to write in the language that the CRA wants to make it scientifically bulletproof. And the third is the consultant dependency. So many SR&ED firms today, they keep the process opaque. So the client is dependent on them. They don't teach the client's engineering or research team how to write better documentation. They just fix it after the fact. So we take a hybrid model. We basically work to file your claim, but we also train our clients to write the technical narratives, to help them with the SR&ED compliance training, similar to how in the research domain there's GCP or ISO training. So essentially, we empower our clients, and that builds trust and separates us from being a transactional relationship to one that serves both of us in a win-win manner. And the last and final piece was the misaligned fee structure. We noticed that a lot of these big firms were charging exorbitant fees, which doesn't reflect on the amount of work they were doing, because the clients end up doing 75 to 80% of the work. But a big chunk of the fees that is coming from the SR&D refund was being claimed by the SR&D consultants. So these were the four main areas we identified, and that's why we started Innovis.
Okay, very, very good. Tell us, Nikhil, just basically what are SR&ED credits and how long has this program been around for?
Sure. So this program from the CRA started actually going back all the way to 1944, and it's evolved dramatically from there. But getting back to SR&ED, it stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development, and it's commonly known as SR&ED. It's basically a program that the CRA and the federal government designed to encourage businesses of all sizes, particularly startups, small and medium-sized businesses, but it helps large-scale businesses as well to conduct research and development work in Canada. And ultimately, the goal is to develop a new, improved, or technologically advanced product, process, device, material, or knowledge that was not readily available in the market today. So in my way, it's the Canadian government's way of saying, we know that innovation is incredibly challenging, it's expensive, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So if you're willing to take that leap into the unknown, then we're willing to help cushion part of the fall. So in terms of numbers, SR&ED supports approximately 18 to 20,000 businesses annually. And it's about $4 billion in investment tax credits, or ITC. About 75%, 3/4 of that is towards small businesses. So you can see, the big push towards small and medium-sized businesses, and only about 25% towards the large scale. Yeah. So that's just a quick overview.
I know that there are many of our colleagues listening who are doing innovative work, Nikhil, and I want to jump into eligibility criteria now. So who would be eligible for these credits?
So that's an excellent question, Yatin. So a lot of the work that is done in Canada, essentially to qualify, the CRA looks for the why and the how. So the why requirement is essentially any advancement or uncertainty. So the work must be conducted for the purpose of achieving scientific or technological advancement. So this means you must encounter a scientific or technological uncertainty where there's a problem where it completely is unknown if a result can be achieved or how to achieve it, because the existing technical knowledge base is insufficient. So the goal is to generate new knowledge to overcome this gap. That's the why component. The second is the how requirement. So the how requirement is what is called the systemic investigation, or the process of the trial and error, the hypothetical testing that is carried out in the clinical world. So essentially defining the technical problem, advancing a hypothesis to resolve the problem, planning and testing the hypothesis through various experiments, developing logical conclusions based on the results. Even if the conclusion is that the hypothesis failed, it's the work that you put in to get there that matters. So maybe I can provide you with some examples of eligible projects.
Please.
Yeah. So in terms of some examples of eligible projects, there are three main categories that we like to put them in. So, for example, experimental development is the most common bucket. An example of this is scaling up a manufacturing process to handle a new, highly volatile chemical compound where standard industry machines fail and must be heavily modified and tested to prevent things like combustion. So in this case, you're testing this new compound to achieve or prevent combustion, which is something new, something that's never been done. And that's why it can qualify. The second is an applied research. Research, an example of that is attempting to, for example, write a novel, custom machine learning algorithm to compress massive data sets without losing data. So because all the existing open source frameworks crash under the specific system constraints available in the market today, if you're developing something new with large language models, particularly with AI, then that's an example of an applied research that can qualify. Finally, the third component is the basic research. So, for example, a laboratory studying the fundamental molecular characteristics of a newly discovered virus without a specific commercial application yet in mind is one approach that an organization can take. And then later it can develop that for sale in the commercial world. So those are the three main examples.
Nikhil, are there any examples that might be very closely tied to clinical medicine? Because when I think about some of the work that our colleagues are doing, I don't know if this checks all the boxes, but for example, there are new EMRs being created incorporating AI. There are AI scribes being created. And while these may be new for some of us, I suppose they're not new on a wider industry level. But perhaps you could comment on that, and if you can give us any examples of activities related to clinical medicine that are being approved for SR&ED credits.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a recent example of a physician that we worked with, and they have a medical professional corporation. They're a physician, and they came to us because they were unsure what projects or what work they're doing would qualify. So essentially, they're a family physician. So a lot of times there's this myth that the work that family physicians do doesn't qualify for SR&ED. So when they approached us, essentially they were working in a rural setting. A lot of their patients are indigenous, immigrants, underserved, women population, things like that. And they were trying different oral formulations of iron for patients with iron deficiency anemia. So what they wanted to see is within different population groups, whether they're pediatrics, adults, immigrants, racialized, and indigenous, which formulations work the best, which ones don't, why, and what were some of the side effects, and what were the correct dosing that is the optimal treatment for these individuals. So by testing this within their own patient population, they were able to carry out a small scale clinical study. They were able to do the statistical analysis and essentially publish this. So that work was eligible for SR&ED because it helped to provide new knowledge that was not available, number one. Number two, it didn't take much effort on their end because they already were seeing these patients on a day-to-day basis, but some of their own staff were able to help out and they didn't need to hire additional staff. Number three, now with that one study, they're able to scale up because of the SR&ED credits they received, and they're able to invest back into their medical professional corporation. Now they have hired a full-time research coordinator. They have about 3 studies ongoing currently. They're looking to scale up rapidly. They're in a process of, within the next 3 to 5 years, opening another clinic, and then they're going to set up research at that clinic. And the other benefit of this is what we advise them is for some of their students who are affiliated with the university or who are very ambitious in their to getting into the research field, pay them a small stipend from this SR&ED credit. It will provide them an incentive to work more diligently and also stay committed. Now, those individuals who started early on, they have later now transitioned and become a full-time clinical research coordinator. And secondly, they have seen their career progress as well. So this is an example of a recent family physician that we worked with, and they were successful in getting approved.
Thank you for that example. Nikhil, I'm curious what types of activities are eligible for these credits. So for example, somebody may have to invest upfront in a technology. There could be labor costs, marketing costs, maybe even contracting some work out. I'm curious in that bucket, what activities are eligible? And then perhaps you can also comment on what activities are not eligible as well.
Yeah, so that's a common question we get, Yatin. So I'll break this down into maybe 3 parts. First is the qualifying activities, then I can touch on the qualifying costs, and then what doesn't qualify. So in terms of the qualifying activities, the core activities, again, must fit into three buckets, whether it's basic research, applied research, or experimental development. Within those, eligible support categories are typically things like engineering and design, computer programming, mathematical analysis, operations research, testing, psychological research. So these are some examples of qualifying activities. The qualifying costs that can be claimed under SR&ED include things like salaries and wages. So if you have, for example, a medical professional corporation and there's a physician and there's additional staff and they're getting a T4 paid directly from the MPC, that work, the research work for that can be claimed. Any materials that were either completely consumed or significantly transformed or destroyed during the R&D process, that can be claimed. If there's any third-party contracts for work done in Canada, up to 80% of that work can be claimed. Also, finally, overhead costs can be calculated using two methods. So the most common is the proxy method, where there's a flat percentage applied to the eligible salary. And then there's a traditional method where you have to keep itemized receipts of things like your utilities, rent, etc. But most commonly, we see the proxy method being used.
And Nikhil, let's say that somebody is working on a project and they already have another grant. Does that disqualify them from taking part in SR&ED?
No, so it actually doesn't disqualify them. It actually helps them. So what you can do is you can stake it in such a way, because the SR&ED program is kind of getting their tax credit for the work done in the previous fiscal year. So if you have already, we've worked with clients and they apply for things like IRAP, for example. And IRAP, you can get it earlier, and you can schedule your refunds in a way where SR&D will cover from anywhere from approximately 35% to approximately 45-50% of your R&D costs. And the remaining can be covered with other grants, things like IRAP, for example. And then there's the provincial tax credits. So if you're in the province of Ontario, there's things like the Ontario Innovation Tax Credit and the Ontario Research and Development Tax Credit, which add to the federal SR&ED credits. So it doesn't disqualify. Yeah.
Nikhil, under SR&ED, I'm curious, how much can be claimed? Perhaps we may not be able to go into numbers, but perhaps percentages. And then I also want to touch on, are these always credits, or can they also be in the form of a tax deduction?
Yeah, so that's another common question we get. So for that, typically the amount claimed depends on the amount, the size of the organization, the number of employees, and the projects they're involved in. So initially, if it's a new startup, or if it's a small scale company that has never filed for SR&ED, we like to use the ideology that it's similar to when you apply for a credit card. That first relationship when you establish with your bank, build that credit history, build that rapport, and then when you need the money, they're more likely to give you favorable terms. So similarly, even if you're starting small, establishing that relationship with CRA, even though you have a lot of overhead costs but not much in R&D, can help you in the long run. And then we adjust and titrate that way. So for the SR&ED component, typically around 35 to 45% of the R&D costs can be reclaimed. And then depending on if you're doing third-party contracts, 80% of those can be reclaimed. If you're consuming materials, we can claim that. And then depending on the approach you use, whether it's a traditional or proxy approach, the traditional approach, you have to keep itemized receipts of all your expenses. The proxy method, it's kind of formula that we use, and it's a base set on the total R&D expenses for that fiscal year. That's the most common approach. And for the provincial, that's added on top of the federal credits. So essentially, if you plan it well throughout the whole fiscal year, you can get about 45-50% from the SR&ED and the provincial credits. And then on top of that, if you get additional funding from things like IRAP or other grants, we have seen clients get up to 60 to 70% from there. So essentially, you only have 30% of your own skin in the game, and 70% is being helped or provided by other government grants to help, reduce the risk.
Those are large amounts, Nikhil, on a relative basis. And My understanding is these are credits rather than tax deductions on our T1.
So they can be used. So there's two components to this. So depending on if we are talking about in physicians, if they have a medical professional corporation and they owe additional taxes. So for example, if the corporation owes 50K in taxes at the end of the fiscal year and we file for SR&D and you get 60K in SR&ED ITC credits, then you would get a blank check for 10K because 50K would be used to pay off the taxes, and you'd get 10K check to your MPC. In the other way, if the corporation owes zero taxes and you were given eligible for 60K in tax credits, you would essentially get a 60K blank check, and you could use that for your MPC as a whatever you want to do.
Okay. So when you get that check, my understanding is that money can be used in any way. Does it have to be directly tied to the research or the business?
So essentially, you can use the money for whatever you want. So most typically, our clients use the funding to hire more employees if they're very growth ambitious and they want to scale faster. Number two, we've seen a lot of this been used to open another practice, for example. So they can be used for that. A lot of organizations, if they're happy and throughout the years, maybe in year 5, year 6, they invest back in the business, in their employees to maybe offer a bonus or reward them additionally in terms of increase in their salary. So these are some of the things. Also, depending on the type of business, if it's a manufacturing business or a research heavily business, they've invested in machinery or capital costs to help scale their business, make it more efficient. So these are some of the ways we can, yeah.
Okay. Nikhil, I'd love to get a bit of a summary on start to finish what this process looks like. I imagine first somebody would have to determine if they are eligible, and then they would have to submit a bit of paperwork. Then there'd be a certain timeline. But can you just take us along that arc and talk to us a bit about what's involved?
Yeah. So for our clients, navigating the SR&D process from start to finish, initially it's a very meticulous exercise because you're bridging the day-to-day engineering or development work and the rigid compliance requirements of the CRA. So essentially what we do is we work in 4 to 5 parts. The first part is project identification, the
Mhm.
what did we do phase. So essentially, the process starts by looking backwards over the fiscal year or looking forward if you're planning proactively to identify work that qualifies. So we do two things here. There's a scoping component and a filtering component. In the scoping component, we're looking through the projects where the team faced significant technical hurdles, failures, or had to build something from scratch because standard solutions failed. In the filtering part, not everything in a challenging project qualifies for SR&D. So we essentially work through and isolate the specific experimental phases from the routine tasks, like standard UI design, basic market research, or routine bug fixes. These are the common things that do not qualify for SR&D. The second step is the evidence gathering, also what we like to call the can we prove it phase. So the CRA operates on a simple rule. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And this is common in the medical field, the research field, and obviously with CRA. This is often the most labor intensive part for any organization. So again, we like to break it down into 2 parts, the technical documentation and the financial documentation. In the technical documentation, we like to ask our clients, do you have whiteboards, version control logs? Do you have meeting minutes, test results, protocols, IRB submissions, meeting minutes that prove that you were systematically investigating a problem or testing a hypothesis and evidence of the clinical trials? The second is the financial documentation. So we like to ensure that our clients have timesheets, payroll records, invoices from contractors, subcontractors, receipts for materials that were consumed or destroyed. So these are common things for financial documentation. The third step is the financial calculation. What did it cost? So once the eligible work is isolated, we need to calculate the exact dollar amount that we're going to claim at the end of the fiscal year. So we like to break this down into the allocating time component and which overhead method to use. So in the allocating time, sometimes if we're working with medical professional corporations, physicians wear multiple hats. They might be teaching, working at an academic institution. They might be seeing patients. They might be doing research work, and they might be involved in other activities. So what percent of their time is dedicated strictly for SR&ED in one fiscal year? So we need to calculate that exact percent for the physician as well as for each employee that was issued a T4. And then we can calculate the amount to claim based on that. The second is, which method are we going to utilize, the traditional method or the proxy method? Again, the main difference being the traditional method, you need to keep an itemized overhead cost and receipts for each thing, such as rent, utilities, whereas the proxy method, we take a flat percentage and we use a formula to come up with the SR&E base salary to cover the overhead expenses. So most software tech companies, for example, use a proxy method. MPCs also now are using the proxy method. Number one, it's more faster, it's efficient, less paperwork. So that's the step 3. Step 4, we work on the technical narrative or the T661 form, which is the form that we must complete to translate the complex work that was done into simple language that the CRA can assess. So we have to assess, essentially, we must answer 3 core questions within a strict word count in this document. Number 1, what was the scientific or technological uncertainty? Number 2, what work did you do in the tax year to overcome that uncertainty? So this is the systemic investigation. And finally, the third question, what technological advancement were achieved? Step 5 is filing the claim or the deadline phase. So essentially, once the technical narrative and the financial schedules are complete, the claim is officially filed. So we submit it as part of your corporate T2 tax returns along with your accountant. And the deadline is typically, we like to file within the first 3 to 6 months of the end of the fiscal year of the corporation. But the hard, unforgivable deadline that the CRA has in place is 18 months to file. So for example, if your fiscal year for a corporation is 2025 December, then you essentially can claim 18 months after that in past work that was done. But again, you might be under the scanner because you're not proactive, you're filing later, and maybe some of that work wasn't documented correctly. So you might be under more scrutiny for that. Now, the final step is once you have filed, the post-filing, the CRA review. So this is the wait and defend phase. If the claim is accepted and filed, you essentially receive a notice of assessment, same as you do on the personal income side. You get your tax credit or a cash refund within usually 60 days, but ideally we see it within the first 3 to 6 months of filing. Or if the CRA has additional questions or they want to do a technical or financial review, then that's the audit phase. And that's where we come in to help defend our clients based on the technical narratives, the documentation. And essentially, again, that's why we like to work with our clients to have the documents ready from day one in case there is an audit.
Nikhil, thank you for all that detail. Now, in terms of best practices, you already alluded to the importance of documentation. And perhaps can you shed some light on other best practices in this process so that things are likely to go smoothly and to reduce the likelihood of an audit?
Sure. So the mere mention of a CRA audit, it kind of spikes the BP of a lot of our clients.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. So essentially, it's normal to feel anxious about having your life's work put under a bureaucratic microscope. However, as an AI analyzing the data and guidelines, I can tell you that the CRA does not audit it at random. They're using, as of April of this year, they're using large language models and specific algorithms to take a risk-based approach to their assessment. So essentially, this is another reason why if you establish a relationship with CRA, even though the amount is small that you're claiming, and if you work with a professional like us, we prevent any red flags from being picked up by their tools, whether it's a human or AI. So if your claim throws up and red flags, you get reviewed. If your claim looks clean, well documented, reasonable, it gets approved. And again, from year 1 to year 2 to year 5, if there's a clear story, clear assessment, then it's easier for them to approve your claim. But suddenly, if you're claiming, say, 50K in year 1, and then in year 3, you're claiming 200K without an increase in the number of projects, increase in the number of employees or expenses, then suddenly something is off. So that's one thing. As we touched on earlier, I believe truly that the golden rule is contemporaneous documentation. So the absolute easiest way to trigger an audit and lose it is to reconstruct your evidence months after the project is finished. If you do it from day one, as your project is being designed from the protocol stage, have those meeting minutes ready, have those IRB submissions documents ready, it's easier in the tail end. So we like to ditch the retroactive summaries. We like to have the raw data ready, whether it's your notebooks, photos, prototypes, things like that. Keep the failures ready, because a lot of times organizations are documenting only their successes, but the companies are often deleting failed codes or throwing away broken parts. Keep them. Document exactly why a prototype failed, because it's the strongest proof of technological uncertainty that you can provide to the CRA. Secondly, the technical narrative. So there's some best practices in terms of the language on the T661 form. So avoiding common buzzwords, things like product, feature, launch, commercialization, market research. These are common things that are done on a day-to-day practice, on an operational sense, that we cannot claim, and it's an automatic red flag in the CRA's books. So again, don't use these words. Secondly, use scientific terminology. Use things like prototype, variable, constraint, hypothesis testing, iteration, systemic investigation. These are examples of common words that we like to use and help our clients utilize in their technical narrative. And thirdly, don't claim the whole project. If you spend, for example, 6 months building a new software platform, but the only true difficult part was a 3-week sprint trying to write a custom database scaling algorithm, only claim the 3 weeks. Because if you're claiming something else for the entire 6 months, the cost might not be justified. The salaries might not be justified. The CRA will be able to pick that up right away. And it's an audit right away. The third is the financial and administrative best practices. So implement project-based time tracking. So we like to tell our clients, whether they're physicians, engineers, or other entrepreneurs, they should not be guessing the percentage of their time that was spent on SR&ED. They should have a time tracking system where their hours are logged directly against the specific R&D work that they're carrying out in that fiscal year. Secondly, beware of sudden spikes. So again, in the first year, if you're claiming 50K, a second year, suddenly you came to 200K. Why is that? Is there additional research work? Is there additional employees? Are you scaling? Are you opening another clinic? Like, what is being done to justify these costs? Thirdly, scrutinize the subcontractor invoices. If you hire a third-party Canadian contractor, you can't just say in the invoice it was services rendered, for example. You have to lay out exactly what services they carried out, have an agreement in place, because the CRA will want to see an agreement. And it's good for your organization too, in case of any conflicts or litigation. It protects you on your end. And the fourth thing is the reality in 2026 for the CRA and other organization is they're using AI to take a risk-based assessment in their assessment of whether there should be an audit, there should not be an audit, based on the claim size, how many years the organizations have filed the claims, the technical narrative, the financial narrative, again, the common buzzwords. So these are some things to look out for and be mindful of.
People may be wondering after listening to this, well, do I qualify? Am I eligible? And the first question they're likely to ask is, where the heck do I start? So can you just give some guidance on that front?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of where to start, as we touched on earlier, it's really working backwards. So from the start of your project, if you know you're investing in R&D, or if you're uncertain, work with someone who's a professional, just like you work with an accountant to get your taxes done. work with a certified SR&D specialist or consultant, because they will look through, find out which projects would qualify. And if you don't have any projects that qualify, we can work with you in the upcoming years to develop projects that you can work with your organization for future years to claim SR&D credits for. Number two, if you have projects, maybe only certain elements of the project qualified. So finding out which elements qualified and finding out how much time was spent on it for both yourself as well as other members of your team, and dedicating that time allocation to file for the total SR&ED claim. The third thing is working with someone professional, again, to optimize the amount of grants that you can get. So we don't do only SR&ED claims. We work with our clients to help get IRAP funding and other grants available in the market, depending on the industry you're involved in. And we also do other things, such as if you need help with getting funding for investors, writing the white papers, things of that nature for our startups particularly. And we have an angel network of investors as well. So if you're looking to scale, that's something we can explore. And a lot of our physician clients, they don't have the time to spend with accountants or to invest in their paperwork because they're already overwhelmed with admin, paperwork in their day-to-day clinical practice. So essentially, our main focus is to take that burden off their shoulder, identify which projects qualify, why they qualify, ensure that their teams have all the documentation ready from day one, and most importantly, number three, make sure they're audit ready from day one. We keep emphasizing this consistently, that their work should be quality-based, not quantity-based, and make sure it's audit ready from day one. So at the end, you're not struggling, you're not scrambling, you're ready, and you're confident. And when you have that approach, your work is reflected both in the technical narrative and the financial narrative, and you can feel easy and rest assured, sleeping peaceful.
Okay, Nikhil, let's wrap it up. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you want to mention? And also, where can people learn about you, your company, and what you're up to?
Yeah, so great question, Yatin. So I think we covered a lot of ground today. I hope it was informative for your audience. But one thing I wanted to touch on was most individuals, they feel that their accountants who they're currently working with have knowledge in this domain, but this is a very niche domain. So sometimes asking a general accountant to prepare an SR&ED claim is a bit like asking your family doctor to perform knee surgery. So their expertise is in their domain. So, in the financial world, general accountants or CPAs are your family doctors. SR&ED consultants are the surgeons. That's how we like to see ourselves. And what your general accountant can do is maybe they can flag that opportunity. They might notice you're spending heavily on R&D or engineering salaries and suggest clients, hey, you should look into SR&D. They can provide the raw data. They're the ones who will pull the exact T4 payroll summaries, the contractor invoices, the material costs that are needed to calculate the claims. They can file the paperwork. Because essentially, once we put together the T661 and all the financial documentation, they can file it. But where the general accountant hits a wall is the reason most accountants don't prepare SR&D claims is SR&D is just not a financial exercise. It's a scientific and engineering test. So general accountants are trained in tax codes. They're not software architecture, material science, or mechanical engineering backgrounds. So because of this, they usually struggle with three critical areas: writing the technical narrative, which is the technological uncertainties, a systemic investigation. Accountants typically don't have the technical vocabulary or engineering background to interview clients to develop the narrative. Secondly is maximizing the nuance. SR&D has highly specific rules. For instance, determining exactly which portions of a subcontractor's invoice qualify, or choosing the optimal overhead calculation. The third is defending the science in an audit. So if there is a CRA audit, they send a scientist or engineer to interview your team. A general accountant cannot sit in that meeting and argue the finer points why a specific coding algorithm failed. So that's why working with someone professional like us can help prevent or help your case and, improve your odds.
Nikhil, I think that's really well said, and we'll be sure to have your website and contact in the show notes as well. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today because I think this is a relevant topic, probably under discussed topic on how a lot of us can optimize our situation. So, Nikhil, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Yatin, for this, and hope your audience gains some knowledge.
A quick thank you to everyone who has taken time to sign up for my newsletter, which is now 2 months old. Last week, I told my older son Rohan that there was one night where I was having such a hard time sleeping because I was so excited to get up the next morning and start working on the newsletter. It's giving me that much joy to create. So to those of you who have taken a moment out of your Friday or your weekend to read the newsletter, it means so much to me. If you're interested in signing up, you can check it out at my website, beyondmd.ca, and you can hit the newsletter tab and hit subscribe. This will be coming out bi-weekly on Fridays, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you as always for joining me, and we'll see you in a few weeks' time. Stay well, stay savvy.